Most gardeners think worms are just mindless compost machines. That mistake costs you yield. When you treat worms like simple waste processors instead of a structured biological workforce, you underfeed them, overheat them, disturb their layers, and collapse the very system that's supposed to build your soil. The result shows up fast: compacted beds, weak root systems, inconsistent moisture, and vegetables that look healthy but lack density and flavor. If you want better harvests, you need to understand that your worm population behaves more like an organized society than a random pile of squirming bodies. And before we go deeper, if you're serious about building living soil that performs year after year, subscribe to the channel. This isn't decorative gardening. We're here for results. Let's talk about what I mean when I say worms operate like a caste system. When you actually observe a healthy worm bed over time, patterns show up. Mature breeders with developed clitellum bands stay in stable moisture zones. Juveniles cluster where fresh organic matter is breaking down. Smaller hatchlings stay in finer textured, microbially rich pockets. They're not assigned roles like ants, but they occupy functional layers based on biology and need. When you disturb that layering constantly, you disrupt efficiency. In my raised beds, especially the 4 by 8 foot vegetable beds where I maintain about 12 inches of living soil, I stopped aggressively turning compost into the top 6 inches. Instead, I apply organic matter as a 1-inch top layer and let the worms decide where it belongs. Within 2 weeks, you can see vertical channels forming. That's not random. Larger worms create transport tunnels, smaller worms process finer particles, and microbes follow. The caste system isn't about hierarchy. It's about specialization through life stage and environmental niche. Here's where most growers mess up their worm population without realizing it. They overheat compost or worm zones thinking more heat equals faster breakdown. Red wigglers operate best between 55 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Once you consistently push above 85 degrees, reproduction drops. Above 95 degrees, mortality spikes. In backyard systems, that often happens when people pile fresh grass clippings 6 inches thick. You cook the lower biological layer, then you wonder why worm numbers decline. In one of my test beds, I split a 4 by 4 section into 2 halves. One side received fresh clippings directly at 4 inches thick. The other side received shredded leaves mixed with aged compost at roughly a 3-to-1 carbon to nitrogen balance and applied at 1 inch. After 30 days, the controlled side had visible worm cast aggregates and stable moisture. The overheated side crusted and compacted. That's not theory, that's observation. Now let's talk about how to support each cast layer effectively. If you're running backyard raised beds, aim for about 10 to 20% worm castings integrated into your soil mix by volume when building a new bed. For an 8 cubic foot bed, that's roughly 0.8 to 1.6 cubic feet of castings. After establishment, don't remix the whole bed every season. Top dress with 1/2 inch of castings and cover with mulch. The mature worms will distribute it downward. If you don't produce your own castings, I've had solid consistency using Vermicompost earthworm castings 10-pound standard in container systems and seed starting blends. It's fine textured, low moisture, and easy to spread without clumping. I don't push products unless I've tested them, but if you want something stable and microbially active, the link is in the description. Use it as a supplement, not a replacement for building your own worm ecosystem. Now here's where this gets interesting for hydroponic growers. People assume worms are irrelevant in hydro. That's short-sighted. In hybrid systems, cocoa, soilless blends, even drip-fed containers, you can integrate worm castings strategically. I run a 70% cocoa coir, 20% compost, 10% worm castings blend for heavy feeders like tomatoes in 5-gallon containers. That 10% castings creates a biological buffer. It stabilizes pH swings and improves nutrient retention. If you're brewing worm tea for hydro supplementation, keep it simple. 1 cup of worm castings per 5 gallons of dechlorinated water, aerated for 24 hours with a tablespoon of unsulfured molasses. Don't brew longer than 36 hours. After that, oxygen drops and microbial balance shifts. Apply immediately as a root drench or mild foliar at a 1-to-1 dilution. That supports the microbial middle class of your worm society, the bacteria and fungi that actually unlock nutrients. Now let's correct a common myth. More worms do not automatically equal better soil. There's a carrying capacity. In my worm bins, once density exceeds roughly 1 pound of worms per square foot of surface area, stress increases, competition rises, reproduction slows. In raised beds, overpopulation happens when food is inconsistent. Worms cluster aggressively under feeding zones and ignore the rest of the bed. Instead of dumping kitchen scraps randomly, I trench feed. I dig a shallow trench about 3 inches deep along one side of the bed, lay in chopped scraps, cover lightly, and rotate feeding zones weekly. That encourages movement and even distribution. You're guiding the society, not micromanaging it. Let's talk moisture, because that's where Caste structure becomes obvious. The top inch of soil should be protected with mulch, straw, shredded leaves, or even partially composted wood chips. Under that, moisture should feel like a wrung-out sponge. If you squeeze a handful and water drips, it's too wet. If it crumbles into dust, it's too dry. Juveniles stay closer to the microbially active upper layer. Breeders prefer stable, mid-depth zones. When soil dries out repeatedly, reproduction drops and your long-term fertility declines. In drought testing, beds amended with 15% worm castings retained moisture about 20 to 30% longer between irrigations compared to beds without. That translates to fewer stress cycles for plants, and stress is the silent yield killer. Now here's something advanced growers will appreciate. Worm castings contain plant growth hormones, auxins and cytokinins, in small but meaningful concentrations. That's why transplants treated with castings show faster root branching. When I transplant peppers, I add about 1 handful, roughly half a cup, of castings directly into the planting hole and dust the root ball lightly. Survival rates improve noticeably in hot weather. But don't overdo it. Castings are biologically dense, not nutritionally extreme. They're not a 10-10-10 fertilizer. They function more like a biological regulator. If your base soil lacks phosphorus or potassium entirely, castings won't magically fix a severe deficiency. They amplify systems that already have foundational balance. Now let's bring this back to the idea that worms are smarter than we thought. They respond to environment dynamically. Change the carbon input, they adjust distribution. Alter moisture, they migrate vertically. Introduce stable organic matter, they increase reproduction. That's adaptive behavior within biological limits. When we observe and cooperate instead of constantly disturbing, yields stabilize. In one season, I stopped tilling my main tomato bed entirely. I layered compost, applied half an inch of castings, mulched heavily and fed through trenching. Yield increased by roughly 15% compared to the previous tilled season, but more importantly, fruit cracking dropped and flavor improved. Soil structure became granular instead of cloddy. The Worm Society did the engineering. If you're building new beds this year, start with a balanced soil mix, roughly 1/3 compost, 1/3 aeration material like pumice or coarse perlite, 1/3 topsoil or cocoa blend. Add 10 to 15% worm castings, protect the surface, feed consistently, avoid overheating, maintain moisture, and resist the urge to constantly fix what isn't broken. Your worms don't need management, they need stability. And that's the real takeaway. The more stable the ecosystem, the more specialized and efficient your worm population becomes. That translates directly into better root systems, better nutrient cycling, and better harvests. If this kind of practical, field-tested soil biology helps you grow better food, subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who still thinks worms are just compost shredders. The more gardeners understand what's happening underground, the better our food systems become. We grow better when we respect the system beneath our feet.